Welcome back to another round of true crime and tapping. Today's case comes to us from two people who actually requested this, one several months ago and the second more recently. Now, when I went back to my messages, I couldn't find the exact people who had requested this case. So please, if it was you, comment below, tell me it was you so I can thank you, because not only did this give me a nice deep dive to go on for all of you in this video, but it also served to allow me to do a little bit of my own deeper research that I was able to do with some local history. And I'll mention that a little bit as we get into the case. So, today's case is one that you may have heard of before, and it is a solved case. It is the murders committed by Belle Gunness, as we know her, the Black Widow who murdered several of her lovers and some husbands that she had over the course of almost 20 years in total. So Belle began her life in the United States under the name Belle Peterson. And this is important to note because most people don't know that she was actually from Norway. She was born Brunhild Paulsdatter Storset. And also, I'm going to try to pronounce a few Norwegian last names in this video. Again, if I mispronounce them, please forgive me. All of the events laid out in today's video happened around the 1900s. So it starts with Belle, and her life is fairly quiet. She was born in 1859 and came to the United States in 1881 at the age of 22. Now, this is because her sister came to the United States prior to her arriving here, and there is no real set out reason that we know she came to the US, but we think it is because she followed her sister here for better opportunities and then settled in a Norwegian speaking community in Chicago, Illinois. Now, I have mentioned in prior videos, I am from Chicago. I am sitting in Chicago at this very moment recording this video, and it is fascinating to me because I got to do a little bit of side history digging in the beginning of this case, relating to the beginning of this case. And again, I will go into a little bit of that momentarily. So we have Belle. She comes to the US in 1881, and 3 years later, she marries who would be her first victim, husband Mads Sorensen. And again, Belle was actually known as Belle Peterson before she married Sorensen. We know her as a different name, and I will get into why that is a little later, but her marriage record that I was able to look up in the Cook County records, Cook County is where Chicago is in the United States, says that she was Belle Peterson upon her marriage. So if you wanted to do a little side digging of your own, you could, for free, go online and look these records up as well. I, again, did a little bit of my own digging because I was curious and wanted to see if I could find them myself, and I was able to. So through this marriage, she and Mads end up buying and running a candy store in Chicago. And according to sources that I was able to find, there is no current information on what the candy store was called, but they did live above it. And it was located modernly at what the streets of Elizabeth and Grand, which there is a tire store and a bank there now, so you can actually look that up. I looked again because I was curious and I like to know these things. So they end up having to claim insurance on this property 2 years later. The business wasn't doing well and it ended up burning down. Now, there is some suspicion, knowing what we will know about Belle later, that she may have had a hand in committing arson in order to burn this candy store down. The money from the insurance, they get this money and then they end up buying a house in what is now the Chicago neighborhood of Austin. So you can look up this address. It's at 837 West Latrobe Avenue. And this house they lived in until his death some years later. Now, in this house, they had 3 children that were living with them at the 1900 census. So again, you can look this up in the records of Cook County. Supposedly, some of the research I did would tell you that there were 2 other children that Belle and Mads ended up having. She gave birth to them. They died in infancy. I cannot find any current records of those children alive or dead at any given time. They don't have graves near Mads or Belle, and I will explain they're buried together after her death some years later. But her family doesn't have any plots or burial areas for these children. So these 2 children may have existed, but they may also be part of this legend. And I will go into that a little bit later as well, where some of Belle's crimes were played up for the shock factor that people often would paint crimes in this light during this time. It was very sensationalist, and newspapers were very prone, especially in certain areas, to report on sensationalism. So you will see details of cases that are exaggerated or overblown, especially when you have women committing crimes. And this is because, especially at the turn of that century, the 1900s, that women were seen as a more calm gender, a more laid back, emotional sort of person who wouldn't be able to be capable of doing such a thing as serial murders. And Belle is considered one of the early American serial murderers in United States history. So you'll see that some of these details might be played up for effect. And again, I will poke holes in some of the information as we go on to her ultimate crime, as it were. Now, Belle ends up becoming a widow when Mads Sorensen dies. And he dies on July 30th of 1900, just a month and a half after that census I was referring to was taken. And during that census, he and Belle have 3 children. One of them is an adopted child named Jenny Olsen. She is known as Jenny Sorensen in the original census, but Jenny Olsen is her actual name, and we don't know to this day her familial tie to Belle. There is some evidence she might have been the daughter of a cousin, but she was the daughter of other Norwegian immigrants that Mads and Belle knew. And I only bring her up by name because she will be considered important later as she grows up and further incidents occur in Belle's life. So on July 30th, Mads dies, and supposedly he dies of heart failure. No autopsy was done because at the time he was receiving treatment for heart failure, and people accepted this idea of his death. The only suspicious detail of his death was July 30th was actually a day that the insurance policies that were taken out on his life, there were 2 of them, overlapped. So it was the one day that someone could claim the money from both of those insurance policies. Then relatives were mildly suspicious, so they asked for an inquest. This inquest took a very long time, but the payout was given to Belle anyway. She was given $220,000 in today's money, and then she purchased a farm outside of LaPorte, Indiana, in LaPorte County. And this is where most of our story will occur, in LaPorte. So within a year of her moving to LaPorte, a boat and carriage house on this farm property burnt down. In this time, Belle also became reacquainted with another Norwegian immigrant called Belle Gunness. They married in April of 1902, and now Belle is referred to as Belle Gunness as we know her. And like I said, most of her crimes will end up taking place. The heinousness of these crimes will be discovered in LaPorte. So famously, she is referred to this last legal name she holds because this is the name she had when she committed the bulk of her crimes. 1 week after the marriage of Belle and Belle Gunness, his infant daughter died of unknown causes while she was alone in the house with Belle. I looked up the daughter's death certificate on a popular genealogy website, and it says her cause of death was edema of the lungs, which is just a term around that time for heart failure, unknown death. In December of 1902, some months later, Peter would die in an accident that would be considered head trauma, so supposedly a sausage making machine that they had in their kitchen on the farmhouse fell off a high shelf, struck him in the head, and he died. Locals and friends of the family were suspicious, especially after Belle gained $91,000, the value of $91,000 in today's money, from his death, so she claimed insurance on his death as well. The coroner launched an investigation and thought that Peter had probably been murdered, or his death was suspicious. During this time, Jenny Olsen, the adopted daughter of Belle, overheard her mother saying that she had killed her father. This was a rumor that Jenny had said this, that she had overheard it occurring, that her mother was talking about it, and she was actually brought to the coroner for questioning in this inquest, but at the part of her, in this piece of her questioning, she denied this ever occurring, that she ever heard her mother say this at all. In 1903, early 1903, a son, Philip, was born. Belle had this son. He was Peter's son prior to Peter's death. And then there's a period of a few years that goes by where nothing occurs. 1906, our adopted daughter, again Jenny, would disappear, and this would go noticed by friends and neighbors. Belle claimed that she was actually going to Los Angeles to go to a famous Lutheran college that was famous at the time for school. There was also talk of her possibly going to finishing school. Belle told conflicting stories to friends and neighbors. In 1907, Belle would hire a farmhand called Ray Lamphere, and he will also be very important to the story going forward. After hiring Lamphere, shortly after, Belle would take out ads in newspapers local to large Midwest cities, including Chicago, Norwegian language newspapers, saying the following passage: "Personal comely widow who owns a large farm in one of the finest districts of LaPorte County, Indiana, desires to make the acquaintance of a gentleman equally well provided with a view of joining fortunes. No replies by letter considered, unless sender is willing to follow answer with personal visit. Triflers need not apply." And this would be the infamous beginning to Belle's crimes. We will go over her victims in full later, but you will see that there is confusion about how many men Belle ended up killing. We only have confirmation of some, and even slightly less confirmation of how many bodies were found on her farm eventually. There are rumors that she ended up killing up to 42 men, though we do not have evidence for this. The first response she got to her Lonely Hearts ad was a man called John Moe from Minnesota. He had $30,000 in today's money to pay Gunness's mortgage. He came to LaPorte with this money and disappeared from the town within a week. George Anderson was the next one. He was from Missouri and agreed to pay her mortgage and wed her. He actually woke up during the night and caught her standing over him, looking like she was about to strike him with a heavy object. He left the farm and never came back. Now, this man did not report what occurred to him, possibly because we can only speculate what he was thinking, but it probably did not occur to him at the time that this was something worrying. This was something that was going to become a problem. During that time, there was a man who was a hack driver, or a delivery man, as we would now call them, for the area, and he reported dropping off several large crates, trunks to Belle's property that were these heavy wooden trunks. And this is also something that would coincide with neighbors reporting that Belle was beginning to dig in a hog pen on her property more and more. It was something that they were noticing occurring. Ola Bugsberg from Wisconsin mortgaged his Wisconsin land for several $1,000s at LaPorte Savings Bank on April 6, 1907. He was last sighted at this bank, and his sons ended up writing to Gunness after finding out that she said she and this man were corresponding. After exchanging a few letters, she told them that she had never seen their father and that he had never come to her farm. Andrew Hegeline from South Dakota corresponded with Gunness from December 1907 until he came to her farm in January 1908. And the events surrounding his disappearance would actually become Gunness's undoing. It would actually spur a series of events that would end up revealing her crimes to this community and to everyone around her. Now, he brought, again, money because this was something that she apparently did ask these men for over and over again when she would correspond with them. He brought $30,000 in today's money from his savings in South Dakota to deposit it at LaPorte Savings. And he was there with Gunness a few days after his arrival. Now, Gunness's brother would write to Belle when Andrew did not return home, and he knew about their correspondence. So he had found these letters and he was reading them and figured out that his brother, where he had gone, and that he had not returned for some time within that allotted time he was supposed to have. Belle went back and forth with this brother and conceded to him that his brother had been in LaPorte, and if he wanted to come and search for himself to find his brother, that he could come and Belle would meet him. Now, this again, agreeing of this meeting by Belle would be the thing that would spur a very significant event that would ultimately lead to her possible death, and we will go over why I say possible, as well as the revealing of her crimes, uncovering of her crimes. So Lamphere was fired before April of 1908. He was fired before this situation occurs, and this is very important to know as well. They hired a second handyman, and on April 28th, 1908, this second handyman, who was now working at the farm, woke up in the house smelling smoke. And because he could not get out of his room, he jumped out of his second-story window, ran into town to get help, to get the fire brigade to try to put this fire out. Now, by the time authorities or any help could come back to the farm, it was in total destruction. The property was burnt down. The scene was a complete disaster. And in the rubble, authorities and neighbors would find a woman who was headless and 3 children dead. And these 3 children were eventually identified as Belle's 3 children, the 2 that she had with Mads, and the 3rd she had with Peter Gunness, Philip. So as these 4 bodies are being removed from the home, questions start to come up about the woman's body. The head was never found, and at the scene they could not find it. There were some questions about the identity of this body. Could it have been Belle Gunness, or was it actually a different person? And some interesting pros and cons to this question, if I can use those classifications, is that Belle had a significant set of teeth. She had some false teeth that were in her mouth that are distinct to her. They were found on the scene inside the ash of the home. However, they were removable. But on the other side of the argument, the body was much smaller than Belle Gunness, and shorter and smaller in weight, stature, and size. Now, bodies, this is a little bit, I suppose, graphic of a description, but I will be as careful as possible on describing it. When a body is set on fire and the fire is allowed to get hot to the point of disfiguring the body in some way, the mass of the body can change. So we do have that as a possibility, because skin is, we are very water-based as humans, for lack of a better explanation. Our bodies, when dehydrated, can shrink. So you have this effect occurring when a body is set on fire. Now, it doesn't actually ever say how ashen this body is. But we can assume that that is another piece of why this identity is brought into question. Now, neighbors also begin to suspect that the previous handyman who was fired months before, Ray Lamphere, might be responsible for the killings and then death from this fire of Belle and her children. Witnesses put Lamphere at the farm. One said he was basically right in the act of running off the property when he saw him, and other friends and neighbors came to ID the body at the house of Belle after they gave these witness statements, and they were questioning again the validity of this body. So there were some questions on either side. Could this handyman have committed these crimes? But was Belle possibly in on it? And they would ask themselves, well, why would Belle try to stage this crime? What exactly would be the motive for her to do that? Well, Andrew's brother finally arrives in the town and begins questioning the disappearance very forcefully of his brother. This coincides with the after effect of this fire. This is just days after. So all of these rumors are swirling and all of these circumstances are occurring at once. This makes the town sheriff extremely suspicious. And Ray Lamphere begins to be questioned about his involvement in this possible crime. During this time, he starts to tell authorities that Belle was having him fill in a hog pit on her land, the same one that neighbors and friends said that she had been digging in uncharacteristically. So the sheriff goes to this pit because he's curious as to why this was such a specific activity that Belle would have Ray Lamphere be doing. And he somehow believes it has something to do with the disappearance that he is being asked to investigate. So they begin digging in this hog pit. And on May 3rd, 1908, they begin to uncover several bodies. The bodies that can be confirmed to have been found in this pit are Jenny Olson, the former adopted daughter, Andrew Haglin, which is this man who they were investigating. They were trying to find him. Ola Bugsberg, Thomas Lindblow, he was a hired man from Chicago who worked for Gunness in 1905. Henry Gerholdt of Wisconsin, he actually came to LaPorte a year before this to marry Gunness and then disappeared. Olaf Svenherd from Chicago, John Moe, Olaf Lindblom from Wisconsin, and 2 unidentified children. And these children, as far as I could find, have never been identified. So who they were, we don't know. We don't know if they are possible children from one of these victims, possibly children of the victims, or maybe they were other farmhands that Gunness ended up killing in that time. Artifacts of other potential murder victims were found in this pit. Evidence that around 30 other individual men could have been speaking to Belle in general, so letters, disappearances reported by friends and family, fitting the description of Belle, fitting the description of who she was, what she was asking for, and where she was asking these suitors to meet her, were found out over time. Some of those individuals' bodies might be part of the remains that were found and unidentified. Overall, 12 individuals were found that they can parse out from the bodies and remains found in this pit. Former farmhand Ray Lamphere was accused formally of murder and arson in this situation. It was because of him that the police then learned more finer details of Gunness's crimes, that she was poisoning these individual men and then striking them with a heavy object, killing them and then burying them in this hog pits. He also claimed that the woman's corpse that was found inside the burned farmhouse was a woman from Chicago who was hired by Gunness as a supposed housekeeper, and that she staged her own death by killing the woman, dressing her in her old clothing, and then leaving the false teeth that she often wore at the scene. She apparently also withdrew money from her accounts before this date. So at LaPorte Savings Bank, there was only a very small amount of money left in Gunness's account. The rest of it had been withdrawn by her days before the fire. Lamphere also claimed that he drove Gunness to the train station and that she got on a train to Chicago the night before the fire. Decades after this, the sheriff in LaPorte County was still getting sightings of Gunness all around the United States, and she became a sort of a legend, an evil one, but a legend that would be whispered about for decades afterwards. In November of 2007, a forensic anthropology graduate school class would be given permission to exhume the body that was found at the farmhouse, because this body was actually buried next to Mads Sorensen, Belle's first husband, because at the time the conclusion was this was her body and it was buried next to him upon them finishing that initial investigation. They tried to compare the DNA of the body with DNA that was found on a sealed envelope in the farmhouse, presumably sealed by Belle. But the DNA was actually not intact. The DNA from the envelope was not intact enough for them to prove if it was Belle or not. So apparently there is still a question, an ongoing question of matching her DNA, or the potential of matching Belle's DNA from confirmed family members to this body that was found in the farmhouse burnt. Now, at the beginning I made very brief mention of sensationalism. And something important to note about reports of crimes at this time, especially, and not even at this time. You can see it with other cases like Countess Elizabeth Bathory, for instance. Women are sometimes villainized to an extent that men are not in these true crime cases historically. It's because it is a better story when played up, as we understand. Dramatizing something like this, which is already horrific, but also interesting to some people, is easy to do. And there were quite a lot of people that would have been taking advantage of such a story like this back in the day. So though we don't know exactly how many men Belle killed, or maybe if she killed them at all by herself, we wouldn't know, because the only reliable witness we have to these crimes is a man who was accused of them himself. And to this day, no one really knows if Belle committed these crimes on her own, if Ray Lamphere helped her with these crimes, and if potentially he got sick of her and wanted to kill her himself. Or perhaps Belle did fake her own death and end up surviving. An old woman forgotten, in hiding, easy to do back in those days. We may never actually know, though I encourage you to look up a case that ends up getting tied to this, which pops up in California some years later. There was apparently a sighting of Gunness, and she was going by a different name. Now, there is no confirmation this was her whatsoever, but there was some speculation. This woman, however, died in jail before her identity could be questioned formally. So we will never know what happened to Belle Gunness, truly. But all we can say is that these crimes were horrific on their own, and no further speculation is needed to understand that. Thank you for joining me for the longest session of true crime and tapping to date. I will be back very soon with more true crime cases and general ASMR videos. Make sure you all stay safe out there, and I will see you very soon. Bye.